Welcome to Creating Disciples with me, Austin Roberts. Today we are going to be looking at a psalm, and we're going to be looking specifically at Psalm 87. I'm sure it's familiar to some of you at least, and we're going to be looking at some interesting concepts and ideas about including others, especially those who we may not think of at our first thoughts of including people. So we are excited to be with you today. I'm glad you're here. So let's hear what the Bible, what the Word, and what God has to say to us today. If someone asks you where you're from, you probably have a place that comes to mind pretty quickly. A place you're proud to call home, the place you think of when people talk about home. In fact, there is a quote I ran across a while back where somebody said, there are only two places that are really home, the place where we're born and the grave. And that's true if you think about it. Because if you were to ask me where I'm from, there's a very specific answer I would give you. The truth is I was born in Loma Linda, California. For college, I went to College Place, Washington, and I spent 4 years there. And then after that, I got a job, and I moved to San Jose, California, and I spent 3 years there. But even when I was living in Washington, even when I was living in San Jose, if you were to ask me, Austin, where are you from? I'd probably sit there for a moment or two and think about it, and ultimately say something along the lines of, well, currently I'm living in San Jose. It's near San Francisco. I went to college in Walla Walla, which was great. But the truth is, I'm from Southern California. I'm from Loma Linda. That is the place I look back to and I call home. The same can be said of my parents. They have both lived in Loma Linda for years, many years, since before I was born. But my dad, if you were to ask him, where are you from? He would probably say, oh, well, we live in Loma Linda, but originally from Texas. We'll probably move back there one day. We'll see if that really ever happens. But he would probably say something like that. And my mom, if you were to ask her, she would probably say something like, well, I've lived here in Loma Linda in the United States for many years. I went to school in Texas, but really I am from Bolivia. That is my home. That is the country where I'm from. That's what I call home. And I'm sure the same can be said of you. You may not live exactly where you were born. Your family may live a long way away. You may feel like you are only a visitor in the place you are now. And there is a home. If someone were to ask you, where are you from? Where is home for you? There's a place that comes to mind. And it may not be the exact place that you live today. I came across this short story about a Texan man and his son. And the Texan man was looking at his son and talking to him about good manners and about being polite. And he said, never ask a man where he's from, son. If he's from Texas, he'll tell you. And if he's not, there's no need to embarrass him. There is a pride we take in the place that we're from, the place we call home. We like to think about it. We talk about it. We talk highly about it. That's home. That's where I want to be. That's the place that I love. Home. You know what that's like. You know what it's like to be home. Well, we're going to look at a text today that talks about home. And it is Psalm 87. And I'd like to invite you to open with me to Psalm 87. But before we read, we are going to talk a little bit about the context of this psalm. Now, in your Bible, it may or may not say this, but in mine it says, of the sons of Korah, a psalm, a song. So Psalm 87 is a Korahite psalm. We don't know exactly when it was written, but it was probably written around the time, maybe, of King Hezekiah. Some scholars believe that. but there's no way to be sure. Now, to continue talking about the context of this psalm, we're going to read the first verse, because the first verse tells us some things about this psalm that might be pretty important, perhaps. So let's get into it. Psalm 87, verse 1 says this: "He has founded his city on the holy mountain." And you know what? Let's add verse 2 onto that. "The Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the other dwellings of Jacob." Now, when you read those couple of verses, it seems pretty clear to me that the author of this psalm was pretty proud of home. And that was not only true of the author, that was probably also true of the rest of the nation of Israel. And we can read that, we see that sense of pride in home and of people and of the land. It's right there in the verses. And there are a couple of reasons for that, 3 to be exact. So we're going to talk about those 3 reasons for a few moments here. First and foremost, the Israelites are proud of home, they're proud of Zion, of Jerusalem, because they are God's people. God has given reason for them to be proud. In fact, think about this, if you will, for a moment. If you went to church, to your home church, to our home church, and you were to sit there were to be a church service, and Jesus himself were to walk in. He were to walk in the middle of the service. He were to walk right down that center aisle, up to the stage, up to the pulpit, and stand there and look out over the church family that had gathered. And he were to look at all the people out there, and he were to say, "Listen, these people here, these specific people here in this exact church, you are my people. You specifically. And I love everybody else, but it is you all who are my people." We would probably sit there and begin to gain this sense of pride, perhaps even a pride that was unhealthy. In many ways, that is what God did with the Israelites. He sat in front of them and he said, you specifically are my people. And the truth is, I love all people, but you all here today, this people, this nation, are mine. So that's one of the reasons why the Israelites probably hold a great deal of pride. And you can understand why. After all, if we were in that situation, the same would probably be true of us. Now, secondly, they probably held pride because of their Old Testament context. Have you read through the Old Testament? Because if you haven't, you should. There are some interesting stories there. There are some stories there that are pretty dark, and there are some times there in which the Israelites lived that were pretty dangerous. In fact, if we read through the Old Testament and we see what's going on there, we'll find some things that are pretty interesting. The Israelites are a nation that are surrounded by nations that are hostile to them. We have the Egyptians down to the south, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Syrians, who are off to the west. And then later on to the north, we have the Greeks and the Romans. And we have many, many other nations mentioned throughout Scripture that are hostile. The Philistines, the Amorites, the Ammonites. There are many, many nations that are hostile to Israel. And it's because of that the Israelites hold such pride in their own nation. Everyone around them seems to want a piece of them. So Israel stands there in the middle, and they are proud. And the truth is, there are good reasons why other nations wanted a piece of them. If you were to open up a map, even a map of today's world, and look at where Israel is, you notice that they are kind of at a crossroads. And while today we have the ability to travel and the ability for information to go very quickly from one place to another, it was not like that back then. Information traveled slowly. To get goods and services from one place to another could take a long time. So it was important for all the nations around that time to control a crossroads where many other nations would trade through. because that could be very, very profitable. They could control that crossroads. They could charge people to come through there to move their trade goods. They could even tax some of those goods. And that is right where Israel sits. They sit at a place that is a crossroads. If the Egyptians wanted to trade with some of the other nations, they would have to go north through Israel. If the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Syrians wanted to trade, they would have to go east through Israel. And then later on, if the Greeks and the Romans and some of those other nations wanted to trade, they would have to go around and then go south right through Israel. So Israel controls this crossroads, and there are many other nations that are hostile to them. We read also that the Philistines are constantly at war with Israel. So Israel's in an important place. And that is another reason why they hold pride. One is because God has told them that they are his people. Secondly, is because they're at a crossroads where everyone is hostile, so doubtless they have pride about having that land, and they look around and they think, oh, all these other hostile nations, this is ridiculous. And then we have a third thing about the context of this text, and that is about the story of King Hezekiah. Now, we're going to talk about this story. We're going to recap it a little bit so it is fresh in your mind as we read the remainder of this psalm. King Hezekiah was the son of King Ahaz in Israel, and he is described in the Bible as being a good king, a king after God's own heart. Many of the kings we run into in the Old Testament are described as evil, and they did bad things in the sight of the Lord, and they turned away from God. But Hezekiah is different. He is good in the eyes of the Lord. He does good things. He goes around and he destroys the altars to pagan gods in Israel. He builds up God's image. He makes people worship God. He does good things for that kingdom. Now, there are a couple of stories that are well known about Hezekiah and his reign. And you can look over those stories yourselves. They are found in the books of 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and Isaiah. But I'm going to tell you a couple of those stories very briefly. One of the most well-known ones is about King Sennacherib. He is from a nation far away, and he has come to attack Israel. And King Sennacherib has many thousands of troops that come, and they far outnumber the Israelites. And the Israelites are in dire straits. They are in trouble. And as the story goes, as the Bible says, they are in Jerusalem. They are shut in there, and they are on their last stand here. They have nothing left. They're going to be taken over. Well, King Hezekiah reaches out to God and asks him what to do. And then night falls. And the next morning, everybody gets up, and they realize what has happened. The angel of the Lord has come down from heaven, and he has killed 185,000 of Sennacherib's troops. And at that, Sennacherib has nothing left to do. He turns around, he packs up his camp, and he heads back to where he is from, because he can't do anything. In fact, the Bible will go on to say that later on, Sennacherib's own sons kill him. It's clear through that story that Hezekiah has a close relationship with God. He has been faithful, and God repays him with something good for being faithful. So there are these three things. We have, first of all, they are people of God. God has told them that. That is why they are prideful. Secondly, they have a lot of hostile nations around them, and so they have pride because of that. And thirdly and finally, King Hezekiah has been faithful to God, and because of that, things have gone well for that nation, and so then there they are, prideful because of that too. Now, that is not the only well-known story about Hezekiah. There is another one that you probably also know. After that time, when they were attacked by King Sennacherib, King Hezekiah falls ill to the point of death. And the prophet Isaiah comes to visit him. And he tells them that. Isaiah says, "Listen, my king, God has said that you are going to die. I am sad to give you this message, but it is the truth. And then Isaiah goes, and King Hezekiah, understandably, is devastated. And so as the Bible says, he turns his face to the wall, and he cries out to the Lord once more. He says, "Oh Lord, I don't want to die. I've been faithful to you. Is there anything you can do?" And before the prophet Isaiah has even left the palace, God comes back to Isaiah and says, go back to King Hezekiah. I am going to add on to his life years that he did not have before. So that's what Isaiah does. He goes back to King Hezekiah and says, listen, the Lord has heard your cry, and he is going to add years to your life. So that's the story. That's the story that is probably behind this psalm. That's at least the time and the context. So once again, we've got these three reasons for pride in Israel. The first is they are God's people. God has stood there and he's looked out at these people and he says, you are my people. And I love the other nations and the other people because I am God, but you in particular are my people. That has given them pride. Secondly, they have all these hostile nations around them, nations that want a piece of them because of the place at where they sit, the crossroads. But often they stand there, they stand strong because of the will of God and his help. And all these other nations are there, and they are prideful because of that. And then finally, we have King Hezekiah, who has been faithful to God on many occasions. And just in these two stories, God has repaid him twice. Once by delivering the nation from King Sennacherib and his army, and the second time by adding years to his life. And because of that, they have a reason to be prideful once again. God has been good to them. God has been good to the king and has been good to the nation. So you've got these three reasons for pride. Now we're going to continue on in this text, and we're going to read Psalm 87, verses 3 to 6. And we're going to see what it says. And here is what the psalmist writes. Glorious things are said of you, city of God. I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me. Philistia too, and Tyre, along with Cush. And will say, this one was born in Zion. Indeed, of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her, and the Most High himself will establish her. The Lord will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born in Zion. Now, the genre of this psalm is a psalm of praise. And you can see that there. The author of this psalm is praising God. The Lord will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born in Zion. It is an upbeat tune. They are happy. They are praising the Lord because they have reason to do so. It's a psalm of praise. But there is something that is interesting in here, something that is strange, odd. It's a little off. It doesn't quite make sense. So let's return to that text one more time, and we're going to read it again. And I want you to notice some of the names of the nations that are mentioned here. Glorious things are said of you, city of God. I will record Rahab, which is another way of saying Egypt, and Babylon among those who acknowledge me. Philistia too, and Tyre, along with Cush. Indeed, of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her, and the Most High himself will establish her. The Lord will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born in Zion. Did you notice some of the names of some of the nations that were mentioned in there? Rahab or Egypt, Babylon, Philistia, Tyre, Cush. And the text says, this one was born in Zion. Now you know those names of those nations. Those are nations that have been hostile to Israel. Those are nations that have attacked Israel, that have held Israel captive. Egypt held Israel captive for 400 years. Babylon holds Israel captive for 50 years. Philistia, although they never hold Israel captive, are always at war with Israel. And then we have Tyre and we have Cush. These are nations that you wouldn't think could be said, these are born of Zion. It's strange. It's odd. And the question is, how did they get in here? What are they doing in here? These are nations that have fought against Israel. They don't belong. They're not a part of this. How are they here? Many years ago, there was a book that was written entitled, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And it was a collection of short stories written by Robert Fulghum. And I want to read you one of the stories in this book. And the book came out in 1986. And at that time, it was in the context of the Cold War, and the United States and Russia, or the Soviet Union, did not get along at all. And so understand that before I read this story. And let's hear what the book says, what this story says. Fulghum writes this in his book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. The Russians are a rotten lot, immoral, aggressive, ruthless, coarse, and generally evil. They are responsible for most of the troubles in this world. They are not like us. That's pretty much the summary of the daily news about the Russians. But sometimes something slips through the net of prejudice. Some small bit of a sign that is so clean and true and real that it wedges open the rusting iron curtain long enough for us to see not an enemy, but fellow travelers, joined to us by membership in the fellowship of joy and pain. See Nikolai Pestritsov. I don't know much about him. I don't know where he is now, but I'll tell you what I know. He was a sergeant major in the Russian army, 36 years old. He was stationed in Angola, a long way from home. His wife had come to visit him. On August 24, South African military units entered Angola in an offensive against the black nationalist guerrillas taking sanctuary there. At the village of Ngiva, they encountered a group of Russian soldiers. 4 were killed, and the rest of the Russians fled, except for Sergeant Major Pestritsov. He was captured, as we know, because the South African military communique said, Sergeant Major Nikolai Pestritsov refused to leave the body of his slain wife, who was killed in the assault on the village. It was as if the South Africans could not believe it, for the communique repeated the information. He went to the body of his wife and would not leave it, although she was dead. How strange. Why didn't he run and save his own hide? What made him want to go back? Is it possible that he loved her? Is it possible that he wanted to hold her in his arms one last time? Is it possible that he needed to cry and grieve? Is it possible that he felt the stupidity of war? Is it possible that he felt the injustice of fate? Is it possible that he thought of children, born or unborn? Is it possible that he just didn't care what became of him now? It's possible. We don't know, or at least we don't know for certain. But we can guess. His actions answer. He sits alone in a South African prison, not a Russian or a communist or a soldier or enemy or any of those categories, but just a man who cared for just a woman for just a time more than anything else. So here's to you, Nikolai Pestritsov, wherever you may go and be, for giving powerful meaning to the promises that are the same everywhere, for dignifying that covenant that is the same in any language, for better or for worse, in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, to love and honor and cherish unto death. So help me God. You kept the faith, kept it bright. Keep shining. Bless you. Oh, the Russians are a rotten lot. Immoral, aggressive, ruthless, coarse, and generally evil. They are responsible for most of the troubles in this world. They are not like us. Sure. Oh, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Philistines. They are a rotten lot. Immoral, aggressive, ruthless, coarse, and generally evil. They are responsible for most of the troubles in this world. They are not like us. But God says, wait a moment. They may not be exactly like you, but they are human beings themselves, made in the very image of God. And they deserve the grace and the love just the same as you do. And the truth is, none of you deserve it. No one deserves the grace of God and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But he didn't just come for us. He didn't only come for the Israelites or the Christians or the Adventists. He came for everybody. He came to seek and save the lost. He came to be here for those who didn't even know they need it. He came for you, and he came for me, and he came for everybody in between. Because that is the grace of Jesus. Even those that we see as ruthless and coarse, generally evil, and those who we feel are responsible for everything bad that goes on, God came for them too, just as much as he came for you and me. And the truth is, those people have been here all along. Even though we may feel like we are the people of God, which is true because we are the people of God, God was there all along to be there for them too. This openness has always been there from beginning to end. So let's read the final verse of this psalm, verse 7. It says, "As they make music, they will sing. All my fountains are in you." A fitting way to end this psalm of praise. And I'm going to read that verse one more time in a different translation, in the New Living Translation. It says this, Psalm 87 and verse 7. "The people will play flutes and sing, the source of my life springs from Jerusalem." So today, as you go into your respective lives, you will no doubt come into contact with those that you feel do not belong. And you may say, "Oh, you're a rotten lot, immoral, aggressive, ruthless, coarse, and generally evil. You are responsible for most of the troubles in this world. You are not like me. You are not like us." But I would encourage you to take a moment to understand the gospel of Jesus Christ and to be open to everybody, regardless of what they may look like or how they may seem. So thank you so much for joining us today on Creating Disciples.